This video was generated with AI. It has a narrative and educational purpose.
More than 3,000 meters below the surface, the ROV descends into a world where natural light no longer exists. Its artificial beam cuts through suspended particles and fine sediment, revealing a landscape in constant decay. Deep-sea organisms drift slowly across the illuminated space, adapted to crushing pressure and total darkness. Gradually, a massive metallic structure emerges from the void, covered in corrosion and marine growth. The bow of the Titanic appears first, and a short distance ahead, the separated stern confirms what history already knows. The ship rests in two pieces, slowly deteriorating since 1912. Before we continue, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us which city you're watching from. The side approach reveals the Titanic's bow as a towering wall of distorted steel, coated in rust and marine colonies. Once smooth, the hull now shows corroded plates and jagged edges, the result of more than a century under extreme pressure. As the ROV advances, the camera exposes the distance between the sections, confirming the violent rupture during the sinking. Between bow and stern, a debris field stretches across the seafloor, forming a corridor that connects the two halves. Every fragment helps reconstruct the moment of separation and the ship's final impact. Even in a place shaped by corrosion and silence, life endures. The ROV's beam reveals large deep-sea fish gliding slowly through the light, drawn by motion and artificial illumination. Pulsing jellyfish drift into the foreground, using the hull as temporary shelter. By keeping the camera close to the structure, the true scale of the Titanic becomes undeniable. What was once an ocean liner now functions as an artificial reef, fully absorbed into the deep-sea ecosystem. Moving through the debris field, the ROV reveals how the ship's contents were scattered during the breakup and the impact with the ocean floor. Broken suitcases lie half-buried in sediment, their leather and metal frames warped by corrosion. Shattered china and metal pieces with still legible markings point clearly to their origin on board. Personal items, like a pair of shoes, remain exactly where the currents left them. Amid rust and mud, porcelain, glass, and metal still reflect the light, drawing attention despite decades of decay. As the ROV advances, elements emerge that sharply contrast with the surrounding destruction. Ornamental grills appear bent, yet their intricate decorative patterns remain visible. Fragments of varnished wood, darkened by seawater and coated in sediment, signal high-quality finishes. A section of an ornate handrail rises from the seafloor, corroded but unmistakable. These details confirm that the debris originated from first-class areas, where luxury was central to the ship's original design. A narrow opening appears in the bow's structure, created by decades of internal collapse. The ROV slows down and adjusts its lighting to avoid contact. Any movement stirs fine sediment, forming a cloud that quickly erases visibility. Exploration shifts from observation to precision. Here, a single touch could trigger further collapse. The ROV advances through an interior corridor where the architecture remains recognizable. Degraded wooden panels cling to the walls, coated in sediment and marine growth. Decorative frames appear warped but still hold their original outlines. Some doors remain closed or jammed by twisted structure, marking spaces that have been inaccessible since the night of the sinking. The corridor opens into an area of sharp elevation changes. Steps appear deformed, some partially collapsed, while columns lean out of alignment. The ROV's camera captures the unsettling sense that the space itself has lost orientation. As the framing adjusts, it becomes clear the camera isn't tilted, the ship is. Inside the distorted interior, the ROV encounters objects tied to first-class comfort. Metal candlesticks lie toppled, coated in corrosion and sediment. Ornate metalwork and mirror fragments reflect the light unevenly. A clock appears without visible hands, time suspended. Broken crystal lies scattered, all sealed beneath decades of accumulated particles. The ROV reaches a surprisingly intact door, locked in place by collapsed debris and structural deformation. Hinges and frame remain, but pressure has rendered the passage impassable. The camera searches for gaps and alternate angles, documenting without contact. Here, exploration meets a clear boundary between observation and risk. Facing the barrier, the ROV pulls back and reorganizes the survey. Corridor geometry is compared to original ship layouts, revealing collapsed zones and possible alternate routes. This spatial reading prevents further damage. If you want to see how far exploration can go without destroying what remains of the Titanic, subscribe and continue this journey with us. The ROV exits the bow and returns to open water. Ahead, the debris field stretches between the two sections, forming an uneven valley on the seafloor. Fish move in small groups, using the wreckage as shelter. At the edge of the light beam, a larger shape passes slowly, a predator adapted to the deep. Arrival at the stern reveals a far more collapsed scene than the bow. Steel plates are folded and stacked, while structural columns appear broken or displaced. The ROV proceeds carefully, navigating unstable beams and narrow passages. The chaotic geometry turns navigation into a maze, where every movement must be calculated. Amid twisted steel and structural debris, the ROV identifies an unusual object, a small firearm from the era, completely corroded and partially buried. It holds no functional value, only material evidence. Its presence shows how personal items were violently scattered during the breakup, preserved not by intent, but by darkness and isolation. Among the stern debris, the ROV identifies objects that appear materially valuable. A small metal box rests among sediments, alongside jewelry, gilded buckles, and scattered coins. Despite their visual appeal, these items are treated strictly as archaeological evidence. The mission remains documentation only, preserving context and avoiding interference with the historic site. While navigating the stern, the ROV detects a structural tear caused by progressive hull collapse. The opening was never meant to exist, yet it allows access to a different interior level. The approach demands absolute control. The camera passes inches from corroded edges, where any contact could destabilize the surroundings. The new corridor shows clear signs of first class. Sections of fine wood remain attached to the walls, darkened and cracked by saltwater. Decorative panels and handles appear corroded but recognizable. The contrast is immediate. Twisted metal dominates behind. Here, luxury survives only in fragments, protected by collapse. The corridor opens into a wide lounge once designed for comfort and social life. The ROV's beam reveals overturned chairs, shattered porcelain, and glass fragments scattered across the floor. Fabrics have lost form, blending into fine sediment. A space built for gathering now exists only as a hollow structure, silent and altered by time. The ROV enters a first-class cabin where personal space remains identifiable. A decorative bed frame is still anchored to the floor, warped and sediment-covered. A cracked mirror reflects the light in broken fragments. Faded curtains cling to the walls, transformed by saltwater into stiff, shapeless fabric. The ROV approaches a large set of double doors, their frames surprisingly well aligned. Surrounding structures are deformed, yet the doors remain fixed, blocked by compacted debris and internal pressure. The camera searches the edges for any passage. None exist. This space has remained sealed since the sinking. structural instability becomes undeniable. At the slightest sign of loose plating, the ROV halts and retreats. Fine sediment lifts from the floor, forming a cloud that nearly eliminates visibility. Every propulsion adjustment must be minimal. Exploration slows into a cycle of advance, pause, and withdrawal, avoiding collapse at all costs. Between compacted debris, the ROV detects an unexpected gap. Tilting the camera reveals a space shielded by surrounding collapse. The beam passes through, illuminating surfaces less degraded than expected. The discovery reshapes the interior narrative. Not everything suffered equally. Some compartments endured in isolation. The ROV slips through the opening into a room protected by collapse. Frames remain attached to the walls, less distorted than elsewhere. A small table sits at the center with toiletry items still identifiable. In one corner, porcelain rests partially buried. Destruction nearby unintentionally created a shield for this space. Inside the preserved room, the ROV identifies clear signs of human presence. Bones lie partially covered by sediment, fully integrated into the environment. No movement, no graphic detail, only silent confirmation of lives that ended here. These remains affirm that this is not just a wreck, it is a human site of history. The camera moves slowly through the sealed interior, where luxury details coexist with unmistakable signs of collapse. Engineering meant for comfort remains locked in absolute silence. Spatial organization reflects social division, while decay exposes structural failure. Here, design, class, and catastrophe converge into a single scene. The ROV advances through a corridor surprisingly well preserved, where decay progressed more slowly. Panels, frames, and alignment remain nearly unchanged. At the end, a door blocks all access. The camera studies angles and limits, but no safe passage exists. The suspense here is scientific. How far can exploration go without intervention? With the exploration complete, the ROV begins its controlled retreat. The light slowly pulls away from the structure, and the Titanic fades back into the deep. The site remains inaccessible, governed only by pressure, corrosion, and time. The ocean keeps the archive, and the decay continues, silent and relentless, long after we leave.